Okay, so I'm back. Same place. I just want to keep these about 5 minutes. I'm not sure how hard they're going to be to transmit to you. I was going to use my flip camera because I can turn those right into video files on the computer and just email them to you, but I'm using the phone because it couldn't focus as well as the camera can on the phone. So anyway, brush strokes are really simple. I get a little bit of paint on my brush. Sorry, I've got the camera kind of hard mounted, so I can't really move it very much. But this should just give you an idea. So I get about that much paint on my brush. And then as far as strokes, I just make short and even strokes on the figure. I think I've lost my focus. Hang on. Let me try this again. Okay. I don't know if that's better or not, but we'll try. Hang on. I'm going to try this again. Okay. So that's better. So anyway, just short, even strokes. You don't have to be too careful when you're doing a base coat because you can go back in all the detailed areas. Like you can see his leather strap right here is going to be brown later anyway. If I got brown on it, I mean, that's the beauty of paint. You can just paint over the next layer with a different color. But the goal would be on these just to get the entire body brown. And this was the step that I was saying, since you've primed brown, you're not going to have a problem with. But you can see with this consistency of paint, I'm not going to need more than one coat for these rats. I'm just going to cover their bodies and get in there. Anything that's brown, I'll cover with brown, and that'll be the base coat. And you can see when it's going on, it's, you know, you've lost some of the detail. If you're worried that your paint's too thick, you can go back and kind of brush it, you know, through in the direction of whatever texture you've got on the model. You can see the detail coming out a little bit, but it's not really necessary. Once this dries, as long as your paint's not too thick, all that detail is going to come out anyway. And then this is just the mid-tone that I'm painting. I'm going to be lightening it with a lighter tone, and then after that washing it with a darker tone, and then going back and lightening probably 2 or 3 steps higher than that after the wash. So the base coat doesn't need to be perfect. You don't really want the primer showing through, but if it's not the rich brown that you want, it's not that big of a deal. So now you can see that's one side. I'm going to show you another rat that I've already painted and dried with that specific paint, and you can see the detail all came right back out. The brown is going to dry a little darker than it looks when it's wet. You can see this is the wet, and this is when it's dry, so it's a little bit darker, and of course obviously in person it looks browner than it is here on the video, but at any rate you can see that it looks, you know, looks good. The detail's still there. Now I'd like to show you how the too thin paint goes on, just so you have a frame of reference. You know what it looks like when you're painting an actual miniature if your paint's too thin. I'm just going to paint the other side of the same mouse using that too thin paint that we talked about earlier, which is right back there. So I'll get about the same amount on my brush. You can see I didn't prime this guy very well. I missed some spots, but that's okay. So same kind of strokes. And at first it looks pretty good. In fact, this paint is so close to almost right. It's might not even be the best one to give you an example of for too thin paint. But I don't know if you can see it as well as I can here in person, but you can see, I don't know, can you? Can you see that the base, the primer is showing through on that one? That means it's going to take another coat. It's not as thick and rich as that side. It's partly because it's just not as nice of a paint. I mean, citadel paints are nicer, but part of it's because it's too thin. There's plenty of apple barrel paints and what's the other brand? The folk art paint that will go on thick and nice just like a citadel paint. The difference on this one is just it's so thin that you're seeing through, and I did do one already, and this is actually 2 coats of that thin paint, and you can see even after it's dried we've got these areas here where you can still see it's either rubbed off maybe when I was picking it up, or it's just, you know, you can still see the base through it, and you don't want that. So this might even take 3 coats with this color, and especially for a base coat for me, that's just not acceptable. And this is a single coat of that one dry, which actually doesn't look too bad. So that was probably after it set out for a while. So lesson being, I guess, if it was a thin paint like this one here, and you let it sit out for a little bit to dry and kind of thicken up on its own, do your first coat, let it dry all the way, and then do a second coat, it might be enough. And 2 coats really are fine, especially when you're talking about a base coat that's going to be washed and highlighted and everything else. This side right here that I've just done now is probably going to look just as good as the Citadel paint of the same color once it's dry. So it's not a big deal, whichever way you want to go. So that marks 5 minutes on this. Like I said, you'll obviously be skipping this part, but that gives you an idea of paint strokes. Just always go in the direction of the texture, especially if you're working with a really thick paint. Don't worry too much when you're doing your base coats about getting into other areas because you'll cover them later. And then the rest of it is really where all of the fun stuff comes in once you've got all your bases on. And since you've already primed brown, you can go straight to that. So I will pick up in a second after I've painted all these brown where they need to be, and we will talk about highlighting and then washing and highlighting again.